All right, thanks, Phoebe. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Just please note that we are recording this session. The purpose of this event is to present what we've learned from the fiscal year 2020 activities and outcomes report that you all submitted back in January 2021. We're also planning to demonstrate how to use the new SHARP and activities and outcomes reports templates in EGMS Reach. We're very grateful to the Federation's Data Evaluation Committee and to all the councils that provided input into the new activities and outcomes report. We're so excited to share findings with you today from that first report. We've built in some Q&A time, but you're welcome to type questions as we go into the chat feature. We'll answer your questions along the way. We'll get to all the questions that we can. If there are some that we run out of time, then we'll certainly follow up by email. So we'll make sure to answer all of your questions. So many thanks, and I'll now turn it over to Elizabeth Quayeri.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Karen. I am Elizabeth Quayeri, a program specialist in the office, and it's really nice to be gathering together today. We are about to begin a year in review, but to reiterate first, in the second half of the webinar, we'll review the second iteration of the activities and outcomes form that you'll submit next month. But for now, over the next 20 minutes or so, you'll hear from the Fed State team with a review of the information you reported to us last January on the November 2019 and October 2020 funding period. Next slide, please, Shanice. Great. All right, to begin, let's just take a second to appreciate that this is a first in all of the years of submitting the former compliance report. We're pleased to now report back to you some of the aggregated information and findings on the community at large. So this is exciting. We'll begin with a recap of the data set, sources, and period. The data was reported by 54 state and jurisdictional humanities councils. This presentation does not include data from NEH's interim partners in Iowa and the U.S. Virgin Islands. They operate under separate reporting requirements as outlined in their cooperative agreements. The data was from 3 required reports: the Activities and Outcomes Form, your Board List and Staff List, and the CARES Act PPR. And finally, new to the Activities and Outcomes report, all councils reported on the same period, the most recently completed funding period at the time. Previously, councils reported on different periods, which proved a bit problematic for data assessment. Next slide, please, Shanice.
Hi, everyone. It's Jean Wertman. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we found out from what you reported to us. New to the report, we asked councils to tell us about the themes they explored to respond to constituents' priorities and/or the changing environment in the state or jurisdiction that they serve. The themes were identified by the councils, and the top themes are represented in this graph. Topping the list, 50 councils reported exploring history and American life. This includes the history of the civil rights movement and women's suffrage, and bringing historical context to contemporary issues. 30 councils reported exploring the theme of strengthening our democracy, and 28 councils reported exploring the theme of the pandemic. Some additional, less prevalent themes you identified are listed on the right. While this isn't an exhaustive representation of all the topics explored by the councils, it provides thematic context for the wide range of programs, funding opportunities, and activities councils delivered during the past funding period. Next slide, please, Shanice. Let's look at some of these activities that councils and their subrecipients conducted. We asked councils to tell us whether they or their subrecipients conducted specific types of activities. Across the top quadrants are the most conducted activity types. Across the bottom quadrants are the least conducted. Council conducted activities are in blue, and subrecipient conducted activities are in green. For example, 91% of councils reported conducting civil discourse activities inclusive of diverse perspectives, and 94% of councils reported that their subrecipients did as well. Only 20% of councils reported conducting Chautauqua events, and only 15% of councils reported that their subrecipients did. In reviewing the most common and the least common conducted activities,
Can I print it?
it appears that councils and subrecipients are conducting more activities that encourage conversation with.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt. I'm so sorry, Jean. So if everyone can make sure that they are muted, we're hearing an in-office conversation, which is lovely, but definitely so glad you're here, but please mute. Thank you. And it's a little different in Teams. You need to hover to see the microphone to mute yourself. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Phoebe. As many of you know, we updated the list of activities types in the revised form to reflect your feedback and responses. Next slide, please, Shanice. Combined, councils and their subrecipients conducted over 11,000 virtual activities and 13,000 in-person activities. On the slide here, you also see the audience reach through virtual and in-person activities. These numbers do not include the reach of media products, however. We are interested in monitoring these numbers as in-person activities resume. We anticipate that many councils will retain some of the virtual delivery methods that they implemented during the pandemic as a strategy for reaching broader audiences. Next slide, please, Shanice.
Thanks, Jean, and hi, everyone. So moving on, we asked councils to define the underserved communities in the state or jurisdiction they serve and to discuss their efforts to engage them. While all councils are tasked with reaching and serving communities throughout the state or jurisdiction, what you see here are the most frequently cited communities in council's responses, with Indigenous peoples, African American, rural or remote communities, and active military and veterans among the most frequently cited. The question as posed was widely interpreted. Some councils identified the specific communities underserved by the humanities in their state or jurisdiction. Other councils spoke broadly about audiences served, and still others responded by speaking to their strategic priorities for audience reach and engagement. As a result of the varied responses and in collaborating with councils, we've revised the question. As you know, you'll now be asked two separate questions. One, asking about the communities the council served during the past funding period, and the other, asking councils to identify specific communities underserved by the humanities in their state or jurisdiction, and to discuss their efforts to increase the accessibility of the humanities to constituents underserved throughout the humanities. Next slide, please, Shanice. Thanks. In asking councils to quantify the number of unique scholars involved in council activities, we also learned that just over 12,000 scholars supported councils. The pie chart here illustrates the various ways in which scholars were involved in the planning, delivery, and evaluation of council activities, as well as in the review of grant applications for council funding. Next slide, please, Shanice. Great. Aligned to NEH's objectives to enhance the availability and quality of humanities programming, teaching, and learning, we asked councils to tell us about their partnerships. From the data we received, we learned that councils collectively partnered with just under 5,000 organizations. These organizations range from schools and libraries to businesses and public media. For next year, we have expanded our list of institution types to include incarceration and detention centers, environmental organizations, and health organizations. We're looking closely at council's involvement of institutions of higher education, particularly with minority serving institutions. While dependent on whether there is a designated minority serving institution in the state or jurisdiction, we did learn that 6 councils partnered with tribal colleges and universities, 10 councils with historically Black colleges and universities, and 15 councils with Hispanic serving institutions. We also learned that 28 councils work to expand access to and strengthen humanities offerings at community colleges. Next year, and in alignment with reports used by other NEH divisions, we'll be asking you about your work with Asian American and Pacific Islander institutions. Next slide, please, Shanice.
Thanks, Meg and Shanice. We asked councils to report on activity by congressional district. The data on this slide is based on the 431 congressional districts in 49 states. As noted earlier, this presentation does not include data from Iowa. Additionally, this slide does not include data from the 6 jurisdictions with non-voting delegations. Of all the congressional districts combined, 84% were awarded grants by the councils. The pie chart illustrates what percentage of councils subawarded funding to all or a fraction of districts in their state. From the reported data, we learned that 43 of the 49 councils awarded funding to at least 75% of congressional districts in the state. Next year, through another update to our annual reporting forms, we look forward to receiving data on the number of applications councils received, funded, and the types of organizations that received funding. Next slide, please, Shanice. While the accounting and reporting for CARES Act funding is entirely separate from that of the General Operating Support Awards, the administration of CARES Act was a significant effort during the November 2019 through October 2020 funding period. As you know, in April 2020, NEH distributed almost $30.5 million in CARES Act funding to the 54 councils and 2 interim partners. Altogether, you made nearly 4,500 subawards, totaling more than $29 million to organizations struggling to keep their doors open and staff employed. We know that many councils subawarded their full CARES Act award, that collectively councils withheld less than 5% of NEH's total allocation to the councils to cover administrative costs. Councils also reported that CARES Act funding preserved more than 8,300 jobs and created more than 800 jobs. As you have until January 2022 to submit your final performance reports, we will continue to monitor and update this data. Next slide, please, Shanice. Next, here are a few stats on you, the dedicated leaders and staff behind the 54 councils. You bring the humanities to life in each state and jurisdiction, collaborating with partners, guiding grant recipients, and responding to the needs of your diverse constituents. You are a small but mighty community that delivers public humanities programming and funding to communities across the nation. New to the Activities and Outcomes report, we learned more about councils' internship offerings. 36 of the 54 councils reported hiring a total of 83 interns. We were pleased to learn that of those interns, 69 or 83% were paid, a critical practice in developing a diverse workforce. Fed State is honored to partner with you and your strategic and creative colleagues to advance NEH's mission. Next slide, please, Shanice.
You may recall that this report serves 3 primary purposes. First, to inform NEH of council-conducted and council-funded activities. Second, to communicate those findings with the agency's stakeholders. And third, to comply with NEH's founding legislation. So what are some of the ways in which we've communicated these findings during the past year? First, Fed State is regularly asked for examples of programs by theme, topic, or audience by colleagues in other divisions. For example, the information you share with us supports the bookshelves posted by the Office of Communications. Next, if you haven't already, we recommend visiting the Budget and Performance page on NEH.gov. The exact path to navigate there is on the slide. There you'll find various agency-wide reports, strategic plans, and budget requests to Congress. NEH divisions contribute to these reports, providing information on grant programs and recipients within a given fiscal year. In these reports, Fed State staff highlight some of the programs and outcomes that you submit in the Activities and Outcomes report. Finally, the data you submit through the Activities and Outcomes report is used during an annual presentation to the National Council on the Humanities Committee on the Federal-State Partnership. This happens during the July council meeting. We are really interested in hearing what kinds of findings and report types would be of interest to you. So please let us know what kinds of summaries, graphics, report types, or tools that you'd find helpful. And working with our internal colleagues at NEH, we'll certainly see what we can do. Finally, as we mentioned at the top of the webinar, we're glad to be sharing back some of the information you reported. We really appreciate your partnership on this journey. As I've said before, we consider our office and the councils a community of learners, and we'll continue to work with you to make the data we collect as meaningful for all of us as possible. And with that, we'll pause for questions and answers.
Great, thanks, Karen. So we have a few minutes, about 10 minutes or so for questions and answers. If you want to type anything into the chat or take yourself off mute, we do have some time, and then we'll move into the second part of the presentation.
I see Phoebe has her hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to, without completely dating myself, just say that I think this has been a work in progress for more, well, at least 10 years. And by work in progress, what I mean is moving from the compliance plan to the activities and outcomes report with the Data and Evaluation Committee, with the staff of the Federal State Partnership, with NEH, with and that this move to collecting more, I would say more uniform, but much more robust data, sharing it with us, and then explaining to the councils what you do with this information and what we could do with it. So it does definitely feel like a step forward after a long period of time. Nothing is perfect, but I definitely want to thank councils who have been involved with this work for a very long time, and also Elizabeth, especially for coming on and making this your work, and the whole team there. So thank you, just thank you for that long time coming.
Thanks, Phoebe. And I just want to reiterate that it's a work in progress, and we'll continue to streamline and ask for your input so that we can make it stronger as the years go by.
We do have a question in the chat that I will read out. It's from Gabe in Illinois. And I think I'll direct to Karen first for an answer. Wondering if the next round of data analysis will continue to separate COVID-19 relief funding activities from other council work.
We've only asked you to separate out activity funded through the emergency relief funds. So the activities and outcomes report will begin to integrate your pandemic response once that funding period has been completed. That is the CARES Act funds and the American Rescue Plan funds. We'll find ways to aggregate the information also, but we appreciate that you're helping us track those separately. And I will say that we would like you to include in the activities and outcomes report your A More Perfect Union activities.
We have another question that's popped up in the chat from Laura in Georgia, saying thanks for the report. And it's helpful to see how things are going across a range of councils. As the activities and outcomes reports have become more thorough, and we do this year after year, are there implications towards what will be required in the self-assessment report?
Again, we're always looking for ways to streamline our reporting requirements. So, and every year we revisit our self-assessment and site review guidelines and guidance. So, yeah, we'll be looking to you for input as we continue to evolve those documents. Phoebe, do you have your hand up again, or is that from earlier? Okay, thank you.
Okay, another question in the chat from Christopher in Vermont. Will there be a public version of the report that includes more data or the ability to look more deeply at the rolled up stats in the slide deck? It's really great to see how the data is used.
Yeah, again, as I said in the opening, I'm interested to hear from you what you think might be helpful and what we could create that could be customized by all of you. So I'll continue to work with Phoebe, and we'll find ways to gather your input. Just reach out directly with your ideas, or we can put together something a little more structured.
I think we've got one more if we still have time, Elizabeth.
We do.
So, okay. So a follow-up question from Gabe. Would we be able to get an individual report for our council that puts their data into context with all of the other council's data?
Gabe, I'll look into that and we'll see what we can do. Let's have a side conversation about that and see what might be possible. All right. I'm looking at Christopher's note. Okay. Thanks, Christopher. Again, let's talk and see what we can do that might be useful for you. Let's go ahead and move on to the review of SHARP and the activities and outcomes report forms. Before I turn it over to Sarah, I'd like to follow up on last week's questions about the subaward recipient form. Using the subaward form allows for easy data collection and analysis, and it avoids some of the tricky issues with EGMS. Using the ADF helps us be aware of all SHARP subrecipients across the agency in a searchable format that would allow us to track them across all NEH funding programs. The subaward form is, in part, helpful for ensuring that our office gets the same information in the same format from each of the councils. And I think it's worth noting that this form will only be used for this one-time SHARP report. If we need to develop another subaward or similar report, we'll take these concerns that you've raised into consideration and work with you as we develop it. EDs, please reach out to me directly if you'd like to discuss an extension or other ways our office may be of assistance. We know that this will be time consuming for many of you, and I'm happy to talk with you. So that said, I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Hey, Karen, sorry, this is Phoebe. Can you just be more specific about how the data will need to be put in there? Because a lot of people on this call were not on the office hours last week.
Oh, sure.
Thanks.
So we have a new agency defined form. It's a fillable form, and the agency is moving in this direction with all reports across the division. So it isn't just a Fed state requirement, but we're trying to do a better job of aggregating the information that we collect and analyzing it. And so this new fillable form will help us in many ways. However, it's been brought to our attention that the way the SHARP subrecipient report selection form has been formatted is very cumbersome, especially for those councils who have many, many subawards. We know that some of you have made more than 250 awards. And because of the way the form is formatted, you're not able to cut and paste an entire entry and plug it into the form. So the sub questions for each entry need to be input one by one. And so if you are one of those councils that have many awards, or even if you just want to chat about how we might be able to improve this in the future, please give me a call directly and we can talk about how we might be able to be of assistance to you. Does that help, Phoebe? Is that what you meant?
Yeah. I mean, just that every entry is going to need to be hand keyed in, and I want folks to know that no matter where they are, that that's what's happening.
Well, you can cut and paste, but it's the individual sub entries, not a full row.
Great, thanks.
All right. So with that, I'll now turn it over to Sarah, and we're happy to answer any other questions you have as well.
Thank you, Karen. Hello, everyone. For those of you not had a chance to meet me yet, I'm Sarah Moore. I'm a new program specialist hired to help out with American Rescue Plan things. So I'm going to take you through the SHARP forms. The SHARP subaward selection form specifically is meant to match the ARP grant making program that the NEH has done. So as Karen said, this is important for data assessment. But in the meantime, there are 3 SHARP forms that I'm going to take you through: the subaward form, the annual report, and the final report. Next slide, please, Shanice. So there are a few key updates for the SHARP forms that I want to go over with you all. First is that they were designed to simplify the reports overall and reduce the overall burden on you. Based on your feedback, FedState has updated the reporting guidance. If these forms look to you like they ask much fewer questions than the CARES form, then you are looking at the correct forms. This is by design. We heard your feedback from the CARES forms and designed the SHARP forms to reduce the overall burden on you all. Second, the forms were designed to establish consistency in information across all 3 funding lines. So the advantage of using agency-defined forms to collect this information is that everyone uses the same data format that allows our office to collect data and analyze data, and this internal consistency is reflected in the overall simplification of the forms. Third, just as Karen discussed at the top of this portion, ARP grantmaking uses the SHARP subaward form, which requires individual entries. You will have to enter each subaward individually. We will take a closer look at what this looks like in your EGMS forms coming up. And finally, if there's no change between the annual and the final reports, there is no need to fill in the information twice across these forms. More on this is coming in later slides, but another simplification comes in these reports. Your final reports will not autocomplete with the information from the annual report. If there is no change from one to the other, you do not need to re-enter all the information. Just indicate that there has been no change, and we will refer back to your annual report form. And with that review of the purpose of these forms and these updates, let's take a look at the next slide to see what they look like. We'll start by looking at the ARPG subaward form. You can find it along with other 2 forms in EGMS Reach. A note about what you will see in the following slides. This is a testing environment. We are aware that things can still change in the back end, but this is what things should look like. To access this form, log into your EGMS Reach, navigate to your ARP award. So remember, this is the number that starts with ZSO. Click on Forms and Reports, highlighted here at the top of the slide. Then click on ARPG Selection Report for Fed State Subawards. Next slide, please, Shanice. You'll see there are form instructions at the top of the page. Please read these. They apply to the full form. Certain sections may have individual instructions, and we'll take a look at those in a second. There are a few technical instructions for using this form, and they are included here, but let's take a look at them together. One, regularly save your work. You do not have to complete this form in one pass. You can work on it, leave, and return back to where you last saved. Does not have to be completed in one session. You must answer each question in a section before continuing to the next one. If you don't, you'll get an angry red EGMS error message at the bottom of the screen telling you what's missing. I'll show you what that looks like as well. When reporting subawards made, each subaward must be entered individually. The form does not accept copy and paste of full rows from Excel files. So you can copy and paste individual cells into individual entries, but not whole rows. And on the next slide, you can see what this subaward selection looks like. So as I mentioned, there are form instructions that apply to the full form, and they remain on display regardless of what tab you're in. And these are in the instructions that have been in that you've seen in the PDF version of this form. They're not new, but we just want to highlight them for you. And you can see here, this is kind of what the entries look like, how you would enter each individual area of the subaward form. Next slide, please, Shanice. So here's the angry red error message. To advance through the form, you must complete all the questions on each tab and click Save or Save and Continue at the bottom of the form. If you attempt to save and continue without completing all the questions, you'll receive a message like this in red font. The good news is that the message tells you exactly where the questions are incomplete. So if you accidentally skipped one, you're not sure where you missed, the error message will tell you. If you complete these questions, and you can save and continue. Okay, on the next slide, let's cover the last step, how to submit the form. The tab where you enter the individual subawards is the second and final tab of the report, where you will find the Submit button. When ready to submit, click Submit. You may experience a delay when you click Submit. This is normal. This is EGMS thinking. It's how it behaves when you click at the Submit form and as it processes. Just be patient. I promise it's working. Once submitted, you'll have access to the PDF of your responses and on the Reports tab, and you will be able to see confirmation that it has been submitted. On the next slide, you can see what this looks like. Once submitted, under the Forms and Reports tab, you'll see that it has been successfully submitted. You'll see the date stamp, and you'll say Submitted across all across the row. You can have access to the PDF of what you've submitted. That's the little paper icon next to the pen button that you use to edit the form. And that completes the review of the ARPG subaward form in EGMS. Let's move on and take a quick look at the annual and final reports for SHARP. As with the last SHARP form, you'll see that there are form instructions at the top of the page. Again, please read them. They are largely the same as the subaward form. The only difference is the lack of the instructions specifically for the subaward form, such as entering in each individual cell and not being able to copy and paste. There is only one page for this form. Once you have filled in all fields, you can submit the form. You can see what that looks like on the next slide. Just like the last form, the submission process is very straightforward. Click this button here next to the yellow arrow that says Submit, and you will be able to see the submitted form on your forms page with the date and time of submission. Remember, again, unless all of the fields are filled in, you will receive that angry red error message when you try to submit. Now let's take a quick look at the final report form at a glance on the next slide. So the reason we're doing this at a quick glance for you all is because the final report is very similar to the annual report. I'm just going to highlight a few key points as you navigate this one. The final report will not auto-populate with your responses from the annual report. But if there's no change from the annual to the final, that's great. You do not have to fill in the form again, but you do have to fill in something, or you will get that error message. Just write that in the final report there has been no change, and we will be sure to refer back to your annual report. And that completes the review of the SHARP forms in EGMS. With that, I will hand it over to Elizabeth.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So now let's turn to the activities and outcomes form. And just a reminder that following this part of the presentation, we'll have some more question and answer time. But if anything pops up, feel free to put it in the chat and we'll get to what we can following this review. Next slide, please, Shanice. Okay. So this is the second iteration of the activities and outcomes report template, and it responds directly to the helpful feedback we received from the councils. So first, and to reiterate what Karen said, a thank you to you, your colleagues, and the Federation for your partnership along this timeline. Here on this slide is a recap of the channels through which you provided feedback that helped shape this second iteration, beginning 1 year ago, actually in December 2020. With your feedback, in addition to considering our office's information collection needs for various NEH stakeholders for agency-wide reports, and to monitor compliance with NEH's founding legislation, we revised the form. Next slide, please, Shanice. Let's review the 5 key updates to this second iteration informed by your feedback. So first, while councils are asked to continue to report on all council-conducted activity during the most recently completed funding period, you're now asked to report only on activity for subawards that closed during the most recently completed funding period. This is included in the form instructions. Second, FedState removes certain questions that you indicated were burdensome. Most notably, councils will no longer report on subrecipients partners, staff professional development activities, or on cost share, among other updates. Third, councils will find new qualitative questions under the impact and outcomes section. The questions ask councils to define and highlight their impact and, if applicable, to describe activity that aligns with NEH's strategic priorities. Though alignment is encouraged, it is not required. Fourth, noting the wide variance in activity format, multi-channel delivery, and in how councils track audience participation and attendance, councils will find updated guidance and streamlined activity and audience questions in the activities section, following the suggestions you provided. Fifth, and finally, councils will now complete and submit the report as a form within EGMS Reach. This is an important tool for increasing the visibility of your work, since the responses are now searchable within EGMS. Here's an example. In the Reach and Access section of the report, you're asked whether or not you involve the participation of minority-serving academic institutions. These questions are asked by all other NEH divisions in their performance progress reports. So now, and for the first time ever, when NEH pulls a report from EGMS of all grants that have, for example, involved the participation of Hispanic serving institutions, councils will appear in that report, should you have responded yes to that question. The online form will also increase data collection efficiency, reduce follow-up communications with councils, and mitigate human error in manually transferring data from Word docs or PDFs to an Excel. We anticipate the form will be in your reporting schedule soon, and we'll notify you immediately via email once it's linked in your reporting schedule. So with that, let's take a look at the form itself. Next slide, please, Shanice. So this all might sound and look pretty familiar to what Sarah just shared with us because it is a similar form. So here we have the form as you'll see it in EGMS Reach. To access the form, log into EGMS Reach, select your most recent SO award, click on Forms and Reports, which is highlighted there, and then click on the Activities and Outcomes report with the January 31, 2022 due date. Next slide, please, Janice. Great. So as with the SHARP forms, you'll see there are form instructions at the top of the page. That's that first yellow box. Please read those. They apply to the full form and they are always on display. Though this is included in the instructions, we just wanted to hit on a few reminders. Again, to regularly save your work, you can leave the form and return to where you last saved. Second, and similar to what Sarah just shared, you must answer each question in a section before continuing to the next section. And third, when you're reporting a number in this form, we use integers only, no symbols, no decimals. And these instructions are there in the form. Sections have individual instructions too. They are the same instructions that have been in the PDF version that we have been circulating. We just wanted to highlight them with that second yellow box here to show you that they're here in the form as well. Okay, so now let's take a look at how to advance through the form. Next slide, please, Shanice. Great. So the yellow arrow points to the sections or tabs of the report. Again, these are the same sections or the outline that you've seen in the PDF of the activities and outcomes template. We're currently in the activities tab, which means we completed all the questions in the preceding tab. As you know from the PDF, the question types are either yes, no, fields to enter numbers, or fields to enter text. There isn't any subaward reporting in the activities and outcomes form, so there isn't any of that Sarah just reviewed regarding the SHARP subaward form. As I mentioned before, you can save your work, leave the form, and return to whatever you've already done. You don't have to complete a tab or a section in order to save it, but you do have to complete a tab or section before continuing. If you attempt to continue with a missing or invalid field, you'll see this. Next slide, please, Shanice. A similar error message. The message tells you exactly which questions are incomplete or invalid. Complete those questions and you can save and continue. Okay, let's cover the last step, how to submit the form. Next slide, please, Shanice. Thank you. So Other is the last tab of the report, the tab titled Other. It's optional to provide any additional feedback, but this is the tab where you'll be able to submit the report. So you'll click Submit, that button highlighted with the yellow circle. Like Sarah had explained with the SHARP forms, you may experience a delay when you click Submit. This is normal in how the form behaves as it processes. One other note about processing time, for the yes/no questions that have a follow-up question, the form quickly reloads in order to display that follow-up question, and it's instantaneous, but it does bring you back to the top of the form or the top of that tab, so you have to scroll back down to wherever you were. But just a note about the experience, and again, that's normal. It only applies to that type of question, just how the form behaves. Okay, next slide, please, Shanice. Thank you. So once submitted, just as Sarah showed, under the Forms and Reports tab, you'll see that it has been successfully submitted, and you'll be able to access a PDF of your responses by clicking on the icon of the piece of paper. So that completes the review of the Activities and Outcomes form in EGMS Reach. And next slide, please, Shanice. So we again have some time to answer any questions if you want to raise your virtual hand or type them into the chat, but I will pause here.
I think we've got one, we've had a few questions in the chat, but there is one that I think it would be great to have a little bit of clarification on from Ken, asking about reporting on subawards that have closed. And he's asking, what about subawards that end but will be renewed for another year for the same project? Sorry. So Ken, does your council consider them as two different awards? Or are they just one of the same award? Just for a little clarification. I think if it has a clear end, it would be that would be considered closed.
Sorry about that.
Feel free to type it in the chat too.
Yeah, it's a multi-year project, but the way we manage our awards is they end and then we issue another one.
Okay, so but it would be two different numbers, right? So even if that's right. Continuing on, yeah, even if it's continuing on, I think as long as you have a discrete funding period for that one award, that's what you would report on. And Karen or Elizabeth should feel free to chime in.
Yeah, Meg, just to add to what you said, I think in the guidance or the instructions for that section, and Ken, I don't know if this makes a difference, but we define the subawards that close, meaning submitted final reports. I don't know if that further helps clarify, but that's another note I'd have, Meg.
Right, so the project final report wouldn't be in.
Oh, Ken, I think you may have muted your microphone accidentally.
Oh, sorry, I was just saying that the project, the final report on the project wouldn't be in at the end of the first grant. That would still be pending until the end of the project.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Ken, I think, sorry, this is Phoebe. Ken, I think what you were saying is the first award or the first grant will be closed, but there won't be a final report as the project continues and will be funded again. It's a multi-year, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so without a final report, do they report that as last year's grant if it's those monies have closed, but there's no final grant report yet? But if it will have a separate grant number? Similar
Right.
question from Patricia Putnam, I think, in Florida.
Well, you may want to consider building in some sort of annual or interim report so that we can collect that information year over year. Otherwise, I guess you could collect the information and report at the end of the project, but interim reports are always a good idea anyway, just to, track the progress and check on the status of the project.
And we've got a follow-up question from Patricia in Florida, asking about audience counts over similar to Ken's question, audience counts over the years. Do they enter it for the fiscal year, or do they wait till it's closed?
We include this in the section instructions for activities. So Patricia, let me know if this answers your question, but for activities that span more than one funding period, we request that you report only the data from the most recently completed funding period. Let us know if that answers.
I see we have a technical question about data entry. Can more than one person enter the data into the form, or can multiple people dive into the form and enter different fields? That I don't know the answer to. Elizabeth, do you know?
That's a great question, and I don't. We can take that away. Well, Sarah, do you have a sense?
I don't, but I can
Okay.
definitely take down that question as one to follow up with you all on later.
Yes, we did. We did alert our partners that if there were any very technical questions, we'd be bringing them to them. So we'll follow up with you on that. That's a great question.
All right. Any more questions or comments?
Teresa from Maryland has her hand up.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I could not figure out how to use or open the chat box. So I am just asking for some clarification. I believe last year, Museum on Main Street activities were considered council conducted, and I just would like some clarification if that has changed and that if those activities are considered subrecipient conducted activities?
That's a great question. And that was some feedback, yes, that you had we had received last year, and we did update that question in the activities and outcomes form for this coming year. So let me know if this helps answer the question. So this falls under the, did the council conduct this type of activity? Did the subrecipient conduct this type of activity? So here's how we updated it. We asked, did the council facilitate a Museum on Main Street program? And you would answer yes or no. And then in a second question, we ask, did the council conduct exhibitions excluding Museum on Main Street? So we heard about the difference between facilitating what the council does versus how the subrecipients run the program. So does that help address that question?
It does, except it doesn't provide guidance as to how to count live activities versus non-live activities, subrecipient separated from council conducted activities. So I'm referring to the activities section where the council conducted activities counts are entered versus section numbers 7 and 8. How many live activities did subrecipients conduct versus non-live activities? So are mom's activities considered subrecipient, or would we include them in the council conducted activity?
It's a really good question, and we tried, I don't know if we tried to get a little more specific. Would somebody else who conducts moms like to share their take on this? I'll open it up to the councils. Caitlin, do you have a question, or can you, are you going to share your ideas?
I was going to share how I understood it and see if that was correct as like another counterexample. My understanding was in the guidance that if we have, the council conducts a planning meeting and does capacity building work with our moms venues, we would count that in the council conducted activity live versus non-live. And then for the subrecipients who actually, are having the tour, and when they have events at their venue, they would count those in the subrecipient section. So it was kind of capturing the full scope of mom's activity. Is that the correct interpretation?
Caitlin, that is how I read it. That's what my intention was to do, because I didn't see the answer in the form. So if others are thinking of it in that way, and thank you, Caitlin, for your perspective. I also was thinking of it that way, that it was at the discretion of the council to determine the difference. I just wanted to make sure or ensure that I was, following what was expected.
And I saw Caroline had her hand up. Caroline, would you like to share? And then we also have Cindy with her hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly what was said, so I lowered my hand, that there are portions of the program that are very council-led and portions of that program that are completely at the hands of a subrecipient or subaward. So I think that answered it just about how I would. Okay,
great. That's really helpful. I can't see who else has their hand up, but I did see Cindy had hers up. So I'm hoping I'm not stepping on anyone's toes who had their hand up earlier. Cindy?
So I still have a question about the subaward reporting. What if you have a subaward that their grant period ended, say, in December or in October? So we're reporting on the November through October grant period. So their grant period ended in October. Maybe their activities happened in October, but they don't submit their final report to us. We give them 90 days. So we don't get their final report until the end of January. So which activities and outcome report do we report their activities? Do we wait for a whole nother year? Or do we just not report their activities at all because we haven't received their final report yet?
Gosh, we'd really like to collect information on their activity. But if you just can't submit it, it just logistically, that's not possible, then I guess I would suggest putting it in the next annual report.
That's how I have always done it before, is that the year that the final report was received, I'll put it into that next activities and outcomes. So I just wanted to clarify that's still what you wanted.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that the subrecipients have their own schedules that they need to adhere to, but if there's a way, if the exact timing doesn't matter and it could be closed out in September and then you get the report in December instead of January, then you'd still be able to capture that information within the period of performance.
So what I'm thinking is maybe if we know somebody is going to be doing their activities in October, we change their reporting. We ask them for a final report before January then.
Well, that's up to you. I don't have any, that would be up to you how you manage that report. Caroline?
I will just say it gets a little bit tricky. We have an administrative requirement for re-grants from our general terms and conditions that says a report cannot be assigned within 90 days of the close of the grant period. They have to have at least 90 days. So you would have to back it up even more to where theoretically any program that happened probably after August would be about the latest cutoff for being able to end the grant period, wait 90 days, get the final report, and then be able to submit it for activities and outcomes. So if you go around changing deadlines, just remember the 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm thinking. So it's complicated.
It is, but it's a very good question. Thanks for bringing it up, Cindy. And I think we have some other hands up. Meg, can you call on folks?
I didn't see any other hands, but we do have a question, unless I'm missing someone.
Yes.
But we do have a question in the chat that I can read off, unless
great.
there's someone else who wants to chime in first.
Meg, I
Okay.
see Anne Boleyn has her hand up.
Okay, then I will hold.
Anne, we can't hear you.
Sorry, no question, but thank you. Excuse me.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So question in the chat from Melissa regarding activities, question number 2. What was the total attendance for all non-live council conducted activities, recorded, printed, or digital activities? The question is, do we include all non-live activities we host or only those we added within the reporting period? For example, we host over 100 recorded lectures on our website. Should we report attendance during the reporting period for all recorded lectures or only those we recorded and uploaded during the reporting period?
I'll let Elizabeth answer that question.
Thanks. I think consistent with, this was a question we had received last year, and I'm pulling up last year's question and answer document, but I believe our intent was to collect information on new activity each year. And Karen, I'll just confirm with you that we would prefer to capture activity, that new content that was posted this year. And I'm scrolling through to see if there's any other place in the form where we would capture existing content and audience. And while I'm looking for that, Karen, is that still the direction you would like to take?
Well, I think that's how we presented it in this year's activities and outcomes report. You're welcome to, use that other activities opportunity to type in and send us information on your existing content and how that was shared and accessed. But, if this is of interest to folks and there's a vibrant use of existing content, then we should, build in some additional questions in the next iteration of the report. Does that help? I think that's the way we're handling it at the present.
Yes.
Thanks, Melissa. All right, well, we're at 4:32. I'm happy to wait, another couple minutes to see if anyone has anything else they'd like to discuss. Otherwise, we'll give you the rest of your afternoon back. All right, well, this has been wonderful to be
Sorry,
with all of you. Excuse me?
I did have a question. I was just wondering if we have questions on the various reports, do we go through our regular NEH contact person, or do we go through the people who so nicely reviewed that particular report today?
You would contact your program officer in federal state partnership, or reach out via EGMS to your grant management specialist. And if you type your question into EGMS, which we highly recommend, we will see it and we will be able to then track when you receive a response.
Thank you. I just didn't know if there was something different because you seem to have specialists on different reports. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you. I want to thank Elizabeth, Meg, Jean, Sarah, and Shanice for all they did to make today's presentation possible. I'd like to thank all of you for joining. And of course, I'd like to thank our partners in the Office of Grant Management and the Office of Information Resource Management for helping us build these reports. So thank you very much. And please be in touch directly if you have any additional questions. We can end the recording. Thank you, Shanice.